Okay, can I welcome everybody very, very warmly to this session by Rabbi Yonatan Raziel of Food from the Soul. We were all smiling because I've known Johnny all my life, and as you can hear, I keep reverting to Johnny, but his name for many years has actually been Rabbi Yoni. And when he actually said to me that he was writing this book about food for the soul, the most natural thing you think of is it's about what you eat, especially those of us who are from the 60s. But in fact, it's very, very much about a Kabbalistic approach to how you eat. Yoni has a very varied background. Before you studied at Jewish college, you studied physics, and then Yoni received a rabbinical ordination. He got his smicha, and over the years he's still carried on having a very varied lifestyle. He's produced medical software and collaborated with different people, and now I think I'm right in saying, Yoni, but I'm sure you'll fill this in, that you spend a good part of your time when not with your grandchildren at yeshiva, or we're not at yeshiva with your grandchildren, either way. And with a special emphasis of your study on the combination of Kabbalah and science, which I just read his chapter in this book on Kabbalah and science, which was an incredible summary, but I need to read it at least twice before I think I'll process it. So can I welcome everybody, and most of all, can I welcome you and thank you so much for doing it, because Yoni's book is just literally, I managed to get someone to bring a number of copies from America, so it's just literally out. And I won't take away, because you might even say, it's dedication or something, and I'll leave that to you. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for that. And thank you very much, Jane and Janet. Jane and Janet sounds like a nursery rhyme, but for organizing this. This is the first for me. The book that I wrote was published in Hebrew, and I find it very difficult to speak about these topics in English because there's no real direct translation. So the book that came out in English was done professionally by someone who specializes in this type of language, but I've never given a talk, and certainly not given a talk to this broad audience like this. So I encourage you all to raise your hand if you want to ask a question, and Janet will be happy to moderate and on the topics that we're discussing. So as Jane said, I've done a few things in life, and I studied Talmud, I studied Rambam, I studied physics, and I did software. I worked in software for many years, and about 12 years ago, I made a real sea change, a philosophical change, because the subjects that I'd always dealt with are very cerebral and very logical, Talmud and Maimonides, and I took a real detour and studied and went into, about 13 years ago, the subject of what's called Kabbalah, and which is a much misguided, misunderstood discipline. So the book that I wrote, which has just come out, which I only held yesterday for the first time, deals with the Kabbalistic aspects of eating. And the reason why I wrote it about eating, for various reasons, but one of them was because it's of interest to everyone. And if I would write about the Kabbalistic meditations on prayer, or on putting on waving the lulav on Sukkot, or lighting candles, it wouldn't appeal to the majority of people. The book was written in Hebrew and has sold very well in Israel, and it generated a lot of interest. And I've got almost every day people write to me saying that certain things like non-religious and religious doesn't have to be. This is not a talk for religious people. It is regardless of their religious belief. But I believe the book has the power to connect two very, very different disciplines, and that were always engaged in eating, and make it much more meaningful. So, that's the introduction. Again, I encourage you to ask questions, because I'm sure that I'm going to skip from one topic to another. I'm going to leave gaps because, as I said, it's my first time presenting this to a general audience, and it's the first time I've presented it in English. So what is so first of all, what's so special about eating? As you'll see soon, I'm going to present a lot of material. Some of it's going to be very new, and even though I've condensed it to in order to be able to stick to no more than an hour, there's a lot of new material, a lot of new ideas, and it takes some getting used to. It's taken me many, many years to become familiar with the whole Kabbalistic aspect. Before we sort of about Kabbalistic aspects, what's so special about eating as far as the Kabbalah is concerned? Kabbalah has meditations, directed, guided imageries for every single aspect of Jewish life, and regarding every single prayer, every single mitzvah, every single thing that we do. There are special and intricate and very, very coherent and sometimes complex meditations and knowledge. Eating is the only topic which is not a mitzvah, and it's not a holy act, but the Kabbalah of the Ari, as we'll see, who he was, deals extensively with the meditations and the philosophy and the knowledge about eating. So what's special about eating that it deserves this kind of treatment? So I'm going to ask you a question, and I ask this question to many people, both yeshiva students and people who know the Bible. And you can write your answers in the chat, or you can think yourselves what the answer is. You know a little bit about the Bible, the first book of Genesis. What was, in your opinion, the first command that the Creator, that God gave to first man, to Adam? So if you think about that question, 97% of people, and I was talking about well-versed biblical students, and I presume it will be the same for the non-Jewish population too, say that it was the prohibition to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. That actually is incorrect. This is what it says in Genesis: "From every tree of the garden you must surely eat, yet from the tree of knowledge you may not eat." So the first positive command in the Bible, which is the most ancient book in the world and that is still read, and is the inspiration for so many people all over the world, there is a commandment: you must surely eat. Now, as we'll see in a second, the Hebrew is translated as something different. This is what it says in the Genesis in the Bible. It says, and it talks about, let me just hide myself here. We have fruit, grasses, herbs, fruit tree bearing fruit, winged fowls, should have dominion over them, and every tree, you should have given you every herb and every tree. And it says here, it talks a lot about food, because it talks about eating. And the next few verses say, "Vayetzav Hashem Elohim l'adam lemor mikol eitz hagan achol tochel." And it's translated incorrectly as though of every tree of the garden you may eat, you may freely eat. That is not the correct translation. Achot tochel is a commandment. So the first command, the first conversation that is recorded in history of God to man, first communication, was telling him to eat. And in fact, if you didn't eat correctly, then if you eat from the wrong tree, then you get all sorts of problems, and led to the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. So here we see that in the Bible there is a commandment to eat, and it's the first commandment that was ever made to man. So here we already have an inkling or a hint that eating is the first divine commandment, and it has a special place in the world. Why? It's common to every living organism, from bacteria to winged animals to birds to men and to creepy crawlies. Everyone needs to eat. You don't need to be told to eat. Everyone needs it, and the wars are started and over food, as we well know, and sources of food. So eating is a very basic primal instinct of every organic living creature. So what the Torah is saying to us, in the very, very simplest terms, if you are able to turn this act, which is common to every single organic living creature, into a exalted and holy or meaningful act, then you can turn every single act that you do in your life to a meaningful and an exalted and a special act. Because if you can do it for eating, which is basic to everyone and to everything, and as always has been, then you have the capability, says to mankind, of elevating your life in every single aspect. So that's my first point, that eating is a fundamental commandment in the Bible. It was the first conversation that the Creator had with mankind, and that is the reason that is given why the Kabbalah deals with eating as opposed to every other action like walking and talking. No, there's no special Kabbalistic intentions or meditations for very mundane acts apart from eating. So now we come, and again, I encourage you to ask questions if you have on what we've mentioned. So now we have the question: what is Kabbalah? What is it? Many people have very incorrect ideas, and it causes a lot of confusion, a lot of how would I say, derogatory thoughts about Kabbalah, especially amongst most Jews and rabbinical figures too. They view it as a kind of magical, incorrect discipline or invention that doesn't have any sources. And this is the major feeling amongst most religious Jews, which is very strange when you come to think about it, because it is the most ancient discipline in the Torah itself. Kabbalah, first of all, I have to know, before we talk about Kabbalah, we have to know about what is the oral law. I presume you know that there is the written law and there's the oral law. The written law is the 5 books of Moses, which we call the Pentateuch, and Genesis up until Deuteronomy, the Devarim. And that was given, according to tradition, by God on Mount Sinai. It is the same Sefer Torah, which is read every day, every week, a number of times a week, every time in shul, all over the world. Sifrei Torah, the scrolls of the Torah that have been found in Masada 2,200 years ago are an exact copy, without one letter missing. So we know that there is a very strong and living connection, authentic connection with the written law. What about the oral law? So here I want to bring a conversation that happened between Richard Dawkins, who is an evolutionary biologist, and Rabbi Sachs, who was one of my teachers and very much influenced me. You can see it on YouTube. Just look up Dawkins and Sachs. And he says the following: Rabbi, what is your opinion regarding the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? Did it really happen, or was it merely symbolic? So Rabbi Sachs says, there's no doubt that the Garden of Eden is a literary allegory, i.e., it's not meant to be taken literally in any way whatsoever. So he's visibly surprised by that response. Aha, so if that's the case, then the splitting of the Red Sea and the giving of the Torah on Sinai are also myths. So Rabbi Sachs says, no, certainly not. These are factual historical events. So Professor Dawkins says, you express a shocking lack of consistency regarding what you define as the holy writings. In other words, this was his answer. Richard, the problem with you is that you're a Christian atheist. You're looking at the scripture as the simple meaning, translation or meaning of the word, but you don't have the oral law. If you were a Jewish atheist and you knew about the oral law, you wouldn't state things in such a way. So I bring this conversation to demonstrate that the Jewish people have the oral law. Most of us, I hope, are familiar with this concept. I can even prove empirically that the oral law is also from a divine single source. For example, it says in the Torah, on the festival of Sukkot, you should take a fruit, which is a beautiful fruit. It says Eitz Pri Eitz Hadar, and the translation of the Pri Eitz Hadar is actually a beautiful, beautiful fruit. It doesn't say that it's going to be what we call an etrog or a citron. All over the world, there is no Jew that takes anything else other than an etrog, and etrogim have been found, again, thousands of years old. And they are exactly the same biological, they've been dissected, and they've shown to be, these are from the etrog tree. How do you know that the etrog is the etrog and not an orange or something else? It's because we have the oral law. Another example of the oral law is tefillin, phylacteries, what Jews put on, male Jews put on every day. It doesn't say that there should be little black boxes and what should be inside them, what should be the parchments, but we know from archaeological ancient discoveries, tefillin that were there and found 2,500 years ago are exactly the same ones that we put on today. How is that possible? Jews are very cantankerous people. They'll always argue about everything. But regarding the oral law, which was handed down from father to son, from teacher to pupil, there is no argument. It just accompanies the written law. So in the oral law, there is two parts. One is the pshat, which is the simple meaning, which is the simple interpretation of the verses. And there is the sod, which is the secret, which is the deeper and esoteric and mystical. And these traditions are also written down in books that are over thousands of years old. However, because the sages were worried about this type of information being given over to people, and they'll think that there is magic to be done with it, or they can use it in the most incorrect way, they limited the way that you can teach it. And instead of having major Talmudical yeshivot and where people can learn Torah, as far as Kabbalah is concerned, you can only learn it in ancient times from a single person. And that is the reason why most Jews, most rabbis, as today, do not know anything about Kabbalah, and they still view it with suspicion. But it is the same authentic and historical side of Judaism, the deeper side of Judaism, that all the other parts are that I've mentioned. So now we're going to look into a few details. What does Kabbalah tell us? And then we can see how we apply this knowledge to the art of eating. So we have the first major principles, and I'm really trying to condense it and make it into a very simplistic or easy to grasp ideas. The foundational principles of shvira and tikkun, or shattering and restoration. shattering and restoration, the shattering of the vessels, and the restoration, which we call tikkun. Many of you may have heard of the concept of tikkun olam. This is a very fundamental Kabbalistic principle. And how does it work? So this looks a bit frightening, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. On the right-hand side, the colorful one, then you see there are circles and there are straight lines, and this is the metaphysical. This is the metaphysical. How would you move in there? Building the building blocks of the world. My English isn't so good. I speak English with an English accent, but I've lived here for over 40 years, and certainly translating these concepts into English is a little bit of a challenge for me. But what we're looking at here is how the Kabbalists describe the metaphysical foundation and building blocks of the world. If you see, the Kabbalah says the following. At the very beginning, before there was a creation, the all of being manifests itself as a boundless uniform light known as Ein Sof, or the infinite. There was no vacuum, there was no void. Everything was this infinite divine light. And then he contracted, which is also called tzimtzum. He contracted himself and as it were, removed himself from the stage of this existence and created a space. But the space is defined, is depicted here by this outer circle. And in that space, he allowed the worlds outside of his divine light to be able to exist, where he is hiding himself and he has to be found. In order for the existence of these worlds to be maintained, there has to be some kind of connection with the infinite light, and therefore they have here. You can see this is like a straw, I call it like a snorkel. It's like if a person is under the water, and he has a snorkel right up to the surface. He's breathing air that belongs to the entire universe, but he's not getting the air of the entire universe into his lungs. Only a small part. So we have a small part of infinity of the divine light inside these concentric circles and inside these straight circles. And if we go over here to the other side, we may see some little dots. There's not coffee spots, but it is the shards, or the breaking of the vessels. What happened when the divine light came in outside into these vessels, into these little minimized areas? There was what's called shbirat kelim. There was a breaking of the vessels, a shattering of the vessels, and because they weren't able to contain this extreme purity and light, and the vessels were broken into millions of parts, and they came down into creation, into the lower worlds. It is our job, after the breaking of the world, to fix it. That is what God's divine commandment is to us, is to fix the broken world. At that particular point came the Big Bang. And there was the Big Bang, which heralded in the physical universe, was actually preceded by, in Kabbalistic terms, by the minimizing the contraction of the divine light, the shattering of the vessels that couldn't contain the small amount of light that came in. And you have a situation where you were able to create a physical world, in which God was hiding. And it's our job, according to the Kabbalah, and according to, in fact, even the simple meaning of the Torah, to fix these worlds. How do we do that? It's to be able to extract the sparks of divine light that are hidden in the husks and the shells of the broken vessels. It's very well known. Look for the spark of divine light in every single thing. That's basically the meaning and the destiny of a single person, of every individual person. I will just mention that there are the physical, metaphysical components of creation. There are fire, air, water, and earth. These are known to. They were not created by Kabbalah. They didn't start this idea, but they were Aristotelian, and they were around for thousands of years. But the Kabbalah adopted these four elements. These four elements, fire, earth, water, and earth, are immutable and fixed elements, and they're fixed. Kabbalah added something, a dynamic and variable domain, which incorporates all created things. From the lowest to the highest, domem, inanimate, somer, vegetable, chai, animal, and medaber, which is human. And what happens here is the way which we are able to see the physical and metaphysical and spiritual components of the world, of the universe, and how it is that we can actually do this tikkun olam. How can we fix the fractured world? And as opposed to the immutable and fixed elements of life, that is the part of the ladder of being, according to Greek philosophy, which can't be changed, and fire will never morph into air or water or earth. So we have these four levels, which actually are able to be elevated from the domain to the somer to the chai to medaber. I'll give you an example. Domem, inanimate, is soil, water, and the soil and water sprouts vegetables. So the vegetable contains part of the inanimate, and the animal that chews on the vegetables and chews on the grass will elevate the vegetable soul and the inanimate soul into himself, incorporated. And the human who eats all these three things, or eats an animal, for example, will inevitably get the vegetable and inanimate souls that make up these four different domains. So here you get a glimpse of how Kabbalah takes eating as the incorporation and the elevation of all these particular aspects that exist in the world. At the root of all physical domains, there inheres a spiritual force, often called a mazal, which is the ultimate reason for their existence. Now, in my book, I posited that the soul of every as we see from the domem or tzomer, every inanimate or vegetable, one makes a vegetable or an animal is its particular mazal or soul. You can compare it to the number of protons, the atomic number inside an atom, which if the number of protons changes, it becomes a different element in the table of elements. So you have a unique soul, which is expressed maybe in the number of protons, which defines what a vegetable is, what level it belongs to. So it gives us the ability to inculcate that soul of that particular. If we eat, for example, vegetables, we are incorporating into ourselves their souls, the soul of the domain, the soul of the inanimate, and soul of the vegetable. And by doing so, we are elevating those particular souls and incorporating it into the highest soul of all, which is the human soul. I'll just give you an idea of the difference between the Greek philosophy of the immutability of creation, which is called the ladder of being, or the natura scala by Aristotle. Nothing changes. It's exactly where it is. It's immutable. But if you're talking about the ascent of worlds, which is called in Hebrew aliyat olamot, which is the fundamental basic aspect of Kabbalah, that we are able to elevate ourselves in the world. The core principle behind the Kabbalistic concept of tikkun olam is cosmic restoration. This occurs when a lower spiritual entity ascends the ladder of creation and upgrades itself, as it were, to a higher rung. Example, when the soul of a tzomer of a vegetable ascends the level of a chai, of an animal that chews on it, or a medaber, a human being. So I give you an example of, you already have the idea that we are able to fix the world somehow by elevating the different parts of the creation. If you were, I'm going to find this. I was looking for a quote from Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, who doesn't believe in these principles of tikkun olam or spiritual souls, or as much of science does, he says we are all clumps of bacteria, clumps of molecules. We have no purpose and we have no destiny. There is no reason for life. There's no reason for death, which is part of this world. Was opposed to the Kabbalistic idea that we can fix the shattering of the vessels that occurred even before the and correct the world and raise it to a higher level. Now, all these principles are contained. How do we actually perform this tikkun? How is this correction? How is this perfection achieved? According to Kabbalah, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are the vessels which contain the infinite light of God. So we use these letters, and the four aspects of letters, if anyone knows Hebrew, you have the letters themselves, single letters. You have the nikud, which is the cantil, I don't know if you call it cantillation, or the I can't exactly does anyone know how to say nikud?
Vocalization.
Well, how do you say?
Vocalization.
Vocalization. So they're different shapes. There are 10 different types of nikud. The shapes of of this vocalization tell us how to pronounce the word. The shapes are vitally important. For example, if we have this line here, this represents wisdom, chokhmah. This represents chesed, beneficence. Chesed is Gillian. Chesed is goodness.
It's mercy, loving kindness,
mercy,
beneficence.
So let's take a look. The flat line says chokhmah is wisdom. Wisdom's there available for all. The giving goodness to people. You have two people helping each other, and the third one below. The shapes of this nikud are vital. Also, the shapes, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which is the oldest alphabet in the world before, according to tradition. The shapes of these letters are also important, and also we have on certain letters we have what's called tagim or crowns. You'll see them in the scroll, and again, this is part of the oral law. And there are something called ta'amim, which we won't go into. So if we read this here, the Hebrew letters are vessels for containing the infinite light of God. That's according to Kabbalah. And they're responsible for fashioning reality. And I'll give you an example. In the Zohar, it says, one of the fundamental books of Kabbalah, one of man's first jobs was to name everything in the world. For example, he called a tree an eitz. He called it a tree in Hebrew, and that gave it the physical reality of a tree. He called a bird after the special name that he gave to that particular bird, and that was how it was created. According to this philosophy, the Hebrew letters are not just there to represent something, but they actually create the thing that is done. There are many stories in the Talmud of rabbis who are obviously familiar with this mystical power, and they will create a calf for eating before Shabbat, or they will create even the most famous one maybe you've heard of, called the Golem on Prague. But he was able to create, the Maharal in the 17th, 16th century was able to create a very strong person to be able to defend themselves against the marauding anti-Semites outside. So the tradition of the fact that Hebrew letters actually form the creativity of the world because they contain the infinite light of God, this is part and parcel of Kabbalistic philosophy. And the shape and construction of each letter indicates the unique pathway for God's creative energy and bears many spiritual significance. And why am I mentioning this? Because we're going to see it when we get to, in a few minutes, the actual meditations of eating. So if we make a conclusion up until now, we've seen that according to the ancient wisdom of Kabbalah, which has very, very strong and is a very, very authentic and coherent part of the oral law, and we believe it was passed down in the same manner that all the other laws were passed down, and they've kept us, and their roots are in divine origin. And we have the books from the ancient books that they're over 2,500 years old. Some of them are very, very difficult to read. But there is, for example, a book called Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of creation, which was written in the 3rd century BCE. And it's very, very understandable from the point of view of the Hebrew. And I'm learning it nowadays with study partners. And so we have this ancient wisdom, the ancient, very, very ancient and coherent philosophy about how things are, how the world really exists, how the world works. The world works as a combination between the physical immutable elements and the elements that are dynamic. And it is our job to be able to take the shards, the sparks from the shards and the husks, and through our meditations that is prescribed in the Kabbalah, to be able to find the spark in each piece of food, in each everything that we eat, as well as every mitzvah and every prayer that we say, and raise it up and take it out of its spiritual prison, as it were. So now we get to after that introduction, we're going to get to some examples of the ancient Kabbalistic methods that are employed when we eat. First of all, we should know this is a chapter from the book of Judges, which happened to occur in 1600 BCE, and we know about the father of Shimshon, of Samson. His name was Manoach, and Manoach was a great man, but he had his issues. The Kabbalah, the Zohar, the Kabbalah, and the ancient books take the story of Manoach, and use it as the prototype for the basis for the Kabbalistic meditations, and is based on this single word here, Peli, which is the same, which is translated here as hidden. It's incorrect. Peli is actually a notoricon. Gillian, what's a notoricon? It makes the words up of Aleph, for the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and Yud is the symbol for the name of God. In this particular story, the angel, Manoach says to an angel, "Come, let's have lunch, let's have supper together." He said, "No, I can't eat of your bread. I'm not going to have an offering for you. I'm an angel, and you're a simple person." So, and because these are called the meditations of Manoach, and it's based on this letter, on this hint to the word Aleph. So if we take a look at the letter Aleph, I know I'm rushing through things, but I want to give you a taste of this particular discipline. We take the letter Aleph. This is the letter Aleph. It's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's made up of 3 parts. This is a Yud. This is another Yud, and this is a Vav. So it's made up of 3 parts. Kabbalah says that the spike of the Yud, and by the way, this is how the letter appears in every Sefer Torah since time immemorial. This particular spike is called a kutzor yud, which is basically pointing into infinity. The spike of the upper yud points to the Keter and the Ein Sof. I'm not going to go into the details. It has a very, very symbolistic or important job. The yud itself represents the world of higher wisdom, which we call the Atzilut. The lower yud represents the world of lower wisdom, where we are actually where we are able to attain and attain this wisdom. And the Vav is like a connection, is the interface between the two worlds, between the entirely spiritual and the physical world. So if you take this letter Aleph, because of the story of this man Manoach and the tradition that we have in the oral law, all the meditations of Kabbalah about eating surround the letter Aleph and various guided imagery, which if one is able to do, or is able to at least know about them, this is how we perform the meditations of the Kabbalistic way of eating. Not what we eat, but how we eat. So having everything I've said up until now is just a forerun, it's just a prelude to what I'm going to show you now. I don't expect in any way whatsoever you to follow exactly what I'm saying, but I do think that you can appreciate the complexity and some of the meaning of what I'm going to say to you. There are 8 stages of eating, and for each stage of eating, Kabbalah, in its various books, tells us that you have to meditate and understand what is happening in that particular stage. I will just say, the reason why I wrote this book was a result of an experience I had about 17 years ago, before I even got into the whole issue of mysticism and this very interesting discipline. And I was at a feast, a wedding ceremony, and there was a man opposite me eating. Now this man, I describe it in my book in the preface, and I just describe watching him eat made me feel that I was watching an angel. The way I describe it very clearly, and maybe I'll just read you. I've got it here. Yeah, I'm just going to read from the preface of the book. And this is what basically was the spark that led to my when I finally got to the meditations of Kabbalah on eating, that I realized I'd seen something special. The plate in front of him contained about half the amount of food that was on mine. No meat or fried food, mainly vegetables and fish. Rather than launch immediately into his food, he pondered his plate for some moments and then proceeded to cut everything into some small pieces. He cut as tenderly as if he was holding a scalpel, laying his instrument to the side after completing a surgery, not to be used again. He put his knife aside. He then planted the fork into the first piece, and slowly, in a light whisper, he made the blessing before placing the food in his mouth. He laid the fork down, chewed for some moments, and then swallowed. He waited slightly before taking the fork in his hand and repeating the process until only 1 or 2 pieces of food were left on his plate. This is what I saw this man doing. I gazed at him, hypnotized by this aesthetic ritual. At the time, it appeared to me he was not feeding his body, but rather he was nourishing his soul. As it says in Proverbs, the righteous one eats to satiate his soul. And that's why I call the book Food for the Soul. There was nothing about his style of eating that even vaguely resembled the way I eat or of anyone else that I know. And I was deeply impressed by the delicate hand movements, by the restraint and self-control. And I was thunderstruck to discover that such a common and base gastronomic action could be elevated to such a spiritual and uplifting accomplishment. I was absolutely convinced that he was not just an ordinary man, but a natural born saint, a special soul that descends into the world. I remember the feeling that I felt was like one of a yeshivot. I forgot about it, and many, many, many years later, when I came to this aspect of Kabbalah, which was about eating, I suddenly came back to me in a sharp memory, like a bolt out of the blue. And I realized that he didn't do this naturally, but he'd learned. He'd studied this philosophy, and he was performing this type of eating, not that I knew what he was doing, for every single aspect of himself, of the food. So I want to repeat the meditations on these letters here for each aspect, for each stage of eating, represent a coherent philosophy and a very ancient discipline. It enables the person who is eating to elevate the souls of all the things that he's eating, the sparks of the food, of divine light that have grown in this food, and to able to inculcate them into himself, into his soul, and they become a part of him. And in fact, the accumulation of these souls, of the spiritual sparks, are the reason why we grow, and the reason why the Krebs process, which is the physical aspect of digestion and etc., occur. The physical expression of the spiritual elevation occurs because of these meditations. I'll just go through a few of them, and then I think we can maybe stop and open the talk for discussion. I don't know how long I've been talking. So let's start on number one. Number one is preparing the spiritual teeth. One thing I have to stress about Kabbalistic intention meditation. It's not just a nice to have. It doesn't just make you feel good or make you aware of what you're eating and very much self-aware of what type of chewing you're doing, etc. So that you can do in any type of self-help of eating. This actually, according to Kabbalah, performs a spiritual effect in the world that corrects the world, and doesn't just correct the food that you're eating, it also corrects yourself, and it also advances the world in its perfection. So you're doing something cosmic. Actually, something happens as a result of this action according to the Kabbalah. So I'll just go for the first aspect of the stage of preparing one's spiritual teeth. The first meditation in the series centers around preparing the utensils used in the process of eating, chief of which are one's teeth. Hence the Ari. The Ari is one of the main proponents of Kabbalah. One explains it so well. One should meditate on this form of the letter Aleph. Remember, we said Aleph is the buzzword for eating. So we have the simple Aleph, whose gematria is 32. Why? You may not be familiar with gematria, but every single letter in the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical value. And this also is part and parcel of the impact of what we're doing. So by knowing what the numerical value is of Yud, which is 10, Yud is 10, and Vav, this letter Vav, is 6. That's 20. That's 32. Did I say that? Did I say that? 10, 20. Oh, here it is. This is the one I'm looking at here. There's two Vavs here. So that's 12. 10 plus 6 and 6 is 32. We have 32 teeth. So before you actually take your first bite of food, you prepare your spiritual teeth to be able to receive the food. Sounds very strange, but once you see the coherence of this method, it has an amazing effect on one's sense of self and eating. Second stage, which I'll just mention, is viewing the food. And this involves two letter Alephs. One is a Yud and a Vav, and one is a Yud and a Dalet and a Vav, which has a different gematria. Again, I'm not going to go into the meaning of each one, but I want to impress upon you how every single meditation here, every single kavanah in Hebrew, has a very deep thought process and explanation behind it. And there are other, there are other meditations for each placing the food in one's mouth. The gematries are also are significant. Chewing the food, swallowing the food. Each one, I didn't put them in here, but each one has their own particular meditation. And digesting the food is the total of all the meditations. Person who does this doesn't have to do it for every single bite. You can do it once during the meal, at the beginning of the meal. I try to do it once a day, and it's usually when I'm by myself, because it's a little bit difficult to do it when you're having family or you're eating with friends. It makes you aware, of what you're eating, of the texture of eating. Is it a vegetable? Is it inanimate? Is it water? Is it, for example, or salt? Is it something like a steak or chicken, which has a life, and therefore which has inculcated the soul of the inanimate and the vegetable beforehand, and you're aware of performing all these different meditations, how significant and how meaningful the food can be. In every single chapter of my book, chapter 2, chapter 3, I explain a certain aspect, and I also have a conclusion about how we can able to précis the ideas that we take off. By the way, junk food. Why is junk food bad for us? Food which is high in sodium, high in processed foods. The natural scientific answer is because all the goodness has been taken out of it, all the vitamins, all the goodness. The real Kabbalistic reason is that all the goodness has been taken out of it is that in natural organic foods, the sparks that are inherent inside this particular carrot or this particular chicken wing are naturally existing in there. Once you take it and you smash it and you put on all sorts of food colorings and other things, then you break down not only the fabric of the food, but you break down the spiritual fabric of the food. And therefore there's nothing to fix, there's nothing to correct, because the food is just a mishmash. It's not a food any longer. We've taken it and we've destroyed it. So here you see the parallel between, there is a Kabbalistic imperative to eat healthily as organically as possible. And I'm not going to go through all the different conclusions of the book, but I should just say that, for example, since Kabbalah views eating as a holy act in the same way that when we pray, or when we put on tefillin, or when we light candles before Shabbat, it's a mitzvah, as we saw in the very beginning. Even in the written law, you shouldn't look at a book or listen to the news. You should take the act of eating seriously. Certainly not while walking or running, or while doing something, or even speaking with your mouth full. Because the actual act of eating can be a tikkun olam. And that is the end of my talk. And are you still with me?